It was when I went to bed drunk as hell after having been thrown out of a Las Vegas hotel, thinking I'm going to lose my job, my girlfriend, my life. And I simply said out loud, I don't want to live this way anymore. And I
Mm,
wasn't talking to anybody else but me and maybe God, but it was like,
right.
I don't want to live this way
That's a
anymore.
pretty powerful prayer, actually. Yeah.
It was a declaration that I'm leaving something behind, whatever
Yeah.
happens. And so when I did my first race, you got to understand the way I had built up myself. People told me I was resilient my whole life because of what I'd been through, but they were wrong. I wasn't resilient. I was a victim the whole time. I was just resentful and gritty.
Mm,
And because
mm,
I was tough, it was more like I was a reactive dog. I was
hmm.
scared to death that I wasn't good enough. I was scared to death that I never fit in. I was scared to death that all this shit was happening to me because of something I did.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you
Yeah.
what, it's just a lot more comfortable to believe that than it is to think that, oh, wait, no, I actually have a life I can live and it is my choice.
I'm Art Blanchford, and this is Life in Transition, a podcast about making the most of the changes we're given. As a married father of 3 teenagers, a longtime global business executive and adventurer, I've been through hundreds of transitions in my life. Many have been difficult, but all have led to a depth and richness I could never have imagined. You'll get to hear all about them on this podcast so that together we can create more love and joy in our lives, no matter what transitions we are going through.
Welcome back to Life in Transition podcast. Really excited to have with us today Nick Klingensmith, who is a 4-time cancer survivor, type 1 diabetic, recovering alcoholic, turned badass adventure obstacle racer, and is now helping others to find their badass, to find their adventure and coaching them toward it. So, Nick, I'm really excited to have you here. Really excited to have a focus on a lot of things, but it's specifically athletic and adventure transformation because that's something I'm really close to as well. And it's been a while since I've had a guest like that on the podcast. So, thank you so much for joining us on Life in Transition.
Thank you for having me. I am stoked to be here.
Thank you. So, when you think about your shift, finding your badass self, finding yourself, what's been the biggest transition for you? I mean, there's a lot of stuff in that intro. Obviously, you have a very interesting story. Which of those transitions would you like to focus on today?
Everything I went through, 4-time cancer survivor, type 1 diabetic, recovering alcoholic, 7 herniated discs from 2 different rollover fatality car accidents, sleep apnea, nerve damage, most of which from the car accidents.
Right.
I almost died from meningitis. I went all 12 rounds with COVID. I once had terrorists put a nerve gas bomb threat on my airplane. It's not really relevant to the story, but I like it for shock effect anyway.
Yeah. I mean, that's crazy. You should be
I
dead then, right?
Let me go back in time for a minute. Back in 1995, this was the same day that there was a bomb, the nerve gas bomb in the Japanese subway. I was on an airplane coming back from Athens to JFK. They told us after 14 hours of being detained at JFK, they later told us it was a hoax. But now, as I'm an adult, I realize, was it a hoax or did they just stop it?
Right. And they don't want people to be scared. And who
Because
knows and who cares? But still, it's
it was an interesting experience to say the least. I mean, you're like
wow.
16 years old and all of a sudden you're like kind of coming to from a long flight. And instead of pulling up to a terminal, you're at the edge of the terminal. All you can see is flashing lights on either side of the airplane. And they keep you there for hours without telling you anything.
Wow.
And then
What
they
was going
took
through
you
your
off
mind at
little
that
by
point?
little. You had to leave everything on the plane. Like you could bring your ID,
Wow.
passport. That was about it. And then they take you to the terminal. That
And
took
you were,
hours. And
Nick, you were 16 and you were traveling alone or with your parents at the time?
I was within about, I'm going to say about a dozen or so other kids and then a couple of teachers from my high school.
Okay. So what was going through your mind at that point?
I was drunk, man. I came back from Athens. It was an international flight. I was half asleep. It was just the last hurrah before I had to be an American again. So I was
The
just,
real world, if you will.
and the thing is too, I've never been one to be scared about things that I have no idea about. So there were a couple of the other students that were kind of freaking out a little bit. And I understand because the thing is, we don't know anything, nothing.
Sure, sure.
Like, but guys were on the ground. And I was also a little naive thinking that, hey, if there was a problem, they'd get us off the plane, not realizing they might have just been waiting for us to blow up in the safest place to do so. But so there's
So
a little
let's
bit of
dig into
naivety
that.
in there too.
But let's dig into that for a minute. You said, I've never been one to be freaked out about something that I don't know about. Whereas it's just as easy to go the other direction. And a lot of people do, right? Where they freak out because they don't know about, right? And they fill the blank space with all these worries and things that could happen. What predisposed you to that? And how important is that to all these other amazing, crazy obstacles, challenges that you've had?
The first time I almost died, I was like 6 years old. Actually, no, let me rephrase. The first time I almost died was the day I was born. They had to medevac my mom via helicopter to I grew up on an island. I was born and raised on Martha's Vineyard, and they had to take her by helicopter on the mainland just to have me. I almost drowned when I was like 7 years old, standing inches from my dad, who didn't know that I was standing behind him and had dropped off in water. I don't know what effects those had, but the fact that 40 years later, I remember them. Well, I don't remember the flight. I haven't been born yet.
Right.
I want to think that there had to be a totality of all these things that begin to add up. But you know what? I kind of lied too. Of course, I have fears of the unknown. And I write about it in my first book, Through the Fire. The fourth time I had cancer, it wasn't that I was scared because I wasn't uncertain. I was certain I was going to die, but you can't be certain. It was the unknown. And so what did I do? It was a fear-based reaction that I grabbed onto the easiest thing that I could understand,
Which at that time was?
You can only get cancer so many times and not die. And it was my fourth time. And that's all I was telling myself. I never looked for the positive in that venture, not once.
In the fourth time you had cancer, you said, my clock is finally up.
I was done. And you know what?
Right.
I almost wanted it that way. I was just done. I mean, you got to understand too, this was a pity party I was throwing for myself. That's all this was a victim. When. Because I wouldn't talk about it with other people either. I really had to create this thing for myself. It was like if I was vocalizing.
So by holding it in, which a lot of people do, I'm stoic and I don't want to whine, but you are actually making it worse inside you.
It wasn't even stoic and tough. It was deliberate, because if I talked to other people about it, somebody was going to try to pull me out of that place.
Oh, and you wanted to be in your pity party at that point. Yeah, I'm raising my hand. I throw those for myself from time to time as well. So I
mean, there was a degree of logic to it, because again, I'm like, this was my fourth diagnosis in 11 years. This one was in the back of my head. It wasn't thyroid. I knew nothing about it. I wasn't getting straight answers from anybody. And in the absence of information, people jump to their own conclusions. And I jumped to the easiest one, which was, thank God, I'm going to finally fucking die.
And how old were you at this time, Nick?
2016, 8 years ago, 37.
37. Wow. And you had been, the first 3 times you had cancer, sounds like it was glands or lymphoma.
Thyroid.
And those have been very tough to overcome. Was there a lot of suffering in that as well?
99% of my suffering has been in my head.
Interesting. But
if you're going to get cancer, thyroid cancer might just be the one that you want. And
so it's
if you catch it early, it's treatable. I mean, you got to understand, I've had multiple surgeries. I have no thyroid. The third cancer was actually just there's residual tissue and cells, and a lymph node has taken it up, and it's still there. I mean, it's been 10 years now, and it's still taking up real estate in my neck. And if I wasn't a speaker, and if I wasn't on podcasts about it, and if I wasn't now forcing myself to constantly share about it, I wouldn't remember I have it anymore.
Right.
And you notice the difference between something I just said when I said before, I was living in this cesspool of negative, destructive. That's the kind of shit that gets you killed.
Right.
To think that way. And so now I talk about
make that shift. Right, because you had this pity party at the fourth cancer. You have this pity party of like, just thank God I'm finally going to end this stuff, and really self-absorbed. But I know what it's like. I mean, I've been there, right? I know what it's like. But how do you shift from that, which a lot of people get in, to this really great energy that you have today, 8 years later?
3 things happened, and they all happened in rapid succession. Number 1, it was a very simple surgery to remove the cancer. It was the easiest time I've ever had with cancer.
Wow. Okay.
It was terrible up here, especially because I was getting back and forth on the ultra. I had to do 2 different biopsies in the back of your head. Like, that's brutal, painful, miserable suffering. I had one radiology report telling me it wasn't cancer, another one telling me it was. I mean, it was a miserable place, right? But when they took it out, they said, we got it. I'm like, what do you mean?
Done.
They're like, we got it. Okay. So I left that. So that was step 1. Step 2, and I didn't realize this at the time, but all of a sudden, man, I had blank, just open canvas in front of me. I was 2 years sober. I had just been given new life. Also, because I was in that place, and I just instantly realized, wow, what a waste of time that was, and what a waste of mental energy that was. And why would I punish myself and live in that place? Like, for what reason? So as I'm going through it, and this is the beginning of the transition, because even though I'd gone through all that shit from the very moment I was born, through self-inflicted misery, through adversity that happened to me, I had not transitioned anything. I was perpetuating the victim mindset the whole time. That's how I made my armor. And now when I found myself at this blank space, about a month later, my boss walks in my office and he says, Nick, I want to do a Spartan race, and you're going to do it with me. And I looked at him and I thought, no.
Right.
No,
Right.
that's
Right.
an 8 to 10 mile trail run with obstacles. That sounds miserable. I have no intention of being that uncomfortable.
Right.
And I went home that night and I'm lying on the couch, literally the couch, not even a metaphor, although it was a metaphor at the time too, because I realized I already was that uncomfortable. Look at where I was, right? Look at what I had just gone through. And I didn't even realize until I wrote my book the importance of the timing of when he walked in my office. It was
Mm.
3 weeks after. I mean, my head was still shaped.
Right.
And I still had like this was an open wound for all intents and purposes back there.
Right.
It was a
Right.
very open one here. I was 2 years sober. I was a VP of sales, like 100 people working for me. We were crushing it. Money was good. My health was as good as could be expected. I was dating a new girl that's my now wife. Everything in the world was perfect.
Right. Right.
And I was stuck.
Right.
So I was like, you know what? I need something to take up this blank space now because otherwise I'm going to replace it with another negative, woe is me. I'm going to go find something wrong with my life to separate myself from other human beings so I can stay stuck on this couch for the rest of my miserable life. Or I can begin a transition. I don't know to what. If we had my virtual screen, you've seen it. There's hundreds of medals behind me.
Right.
It started with one. It just started
Right.
with one decision to do one race, one time. I had no intention of doing anything ever again. So that was the second thing, is saying yes to that race. The third thing is
Can
when
I
I
dig into
finished.
something though, Nick, before you
Yeah.
get to your third point? Something happened. Like, yes, the cancer, when you woke up and they said, we got it, that was the trigger. But something in your mind went from victim, depressed, woe is me, pity party, to starting to take action at that point. Can you unpack that? Did you have the realization of that at the time? Like, what was that tipping point?
I don't think I realized any of this. There's only a few key moments that I really understood in the time, and we haven't talked about them yet.
Okay.
Um,
So that point wasn't, it was still stuff sort of happening to you, sort of grace of God, if you will.
I was going through it, I don't know if anything was happening to me, but I'll tell you what, as I look back about something, right? Things can't exist in a vacuum, right? That void needs to get filled somehow. So when I stopped drinking, I filled that void through sobriety and program of sobriety. And it was increasing a lot of parts of my life, but I was still missing something. There was this other aspect, which at the time I didn't know, but even though the program I'm in is a spiritual program, I had not really adopted the spirituality aspect of it. And so there was
Mm.
something missing.
So
And
you had
so
used it to get sober, but you hadn't really given your life to a higher power fully.
something like that. There was just a part of me that was missing and I didn't know what it was. So I
Sure.
kept looking to fill that with stuff. Even sober, I was still looking for validation from others,
Hmm.
validation from women. Like I wasn't whole.
Hmm.
And so when I started racing, this was why this was the third part, because the third part showed me that there's a better way. Just
Hmm.
signing up for the race was a decision that I wanted something better for myself, just like
Right.
it was saying, I'm going to get sober, right? The
Right.
work comes after.
Right. But the decisions are so key. And I love that you see that as the tipping point was the decision, not the races, because it is the decision is where the start of the new adventure is.
It has, because it's a declaration. I'll tell you what, the greatest one was when I got sober. It was before I went to my first meeting. It was when I went to bed drunk as hell after having been thrown out of a Las Vegas hotel, thinking I'm going to lose my job, my girlfriend, my life. And I simply said out loud, I don't want to live this way anymore. And I
Mm.
wasn't talking to anybody else but me and maybe
Mm.
God, but it was like,
Right.
I don't want to live this way
That's a
anymore.
pretty powerful prayer, actually. Yeah.
It was a declaration that I'm leaving something behind, whatever
Yeah.
happens. And so when I did my first race, you got to understand the way I had built up myself. People told me I was resilient my whole life because of what I'd been through, but they were wrong. I wasn't resilient. I was a victim the whole time. I was just resentful and gritty.
Mm.
And because
Mm.
I was tough, it was more like I was a reactive dog. I was
Hmm.
scared to death that I wasn't good enough. I was scared to death that I never fit in. I was scared to death that all this shit was happening to me because of something I did.
Hmm. Yeah.
And I'll tell you
Yeah.
what, it's just a lot more comfortable to believe that than it is to think that, oh, wait, no, I actually have a life I can live and it is my choice. So when I was running that race, I had convinced myself I couldn't run because of my knees, that I couldn't be out in the world because of diabetes, that I would always be a piece of shit because my alcohol, all this stuff, right? That I can't go do these things. I sleep apnea. And I'm out in the middle of nowhere, Jacksonville area, Florida, covered in mud and dirt and grit and awesomeness. I'm climbing under barbed wire, just
Climate.
rolling around in cow
Yeah.
shit, carrying heavy objects, climbing up ropes. And I'm thinking to myself, this wasn't me against the world. It was me in the world. I felt like a little kid again. It was liberating because at
So you
that
had this
moment,
sense of adventure and playfulness and challenge and
yeah, just this open universe. And the thing is, though, is I realized it didn't exist just in that bubble. I realized in that moment that everything I had told myself before was a lie.
Tell me more
And
about
that
that.
it all that bullshit about, "Oh, I'm stuck because of this. I can't because of my knees. I can't because of diabetes. I can't because of sleep apnea. I can't." I was just wrong.
So all of this victimhood speak, all of this pity party, all of that, you're saying it hit you while you were out there in your first Spartan race that this was bullshit.
Part of except for one thing. I didn't recognize the victimhood yet. No, I didn't recognize the mindset aspect nor the pity party. All I
Okay.
recognized was the self-imposed limitations that were
Okay.
there.
You did realize that, hey, life isn't just happening to me. I have some choice. I have this, there's a gap between the stimulus and response, as Viktor Frankl says. And you started to realize that you could do something in that gap between what
I don't
happened
even
to
know
you.
if it was there yet. I'll be honest. It took a
Okay.
little while,
Okay.
and I'll tell you why, because all I recognized that day was that these limitations didn't exist.
Okay. Okay.
All I
Great.
did was take the governor
Great.
off. So when I crossed that
Right.
finish line, right, I had this just I didn't know anything anymore.
Perfect. Oh,
And
that's
it was
awesome, Nick. That's
that was a
awesome.
good feeling.
Yeah. Well, you had gotten to at that point as you realized all of the assumptions you had didn't no longer apply. You
Yeah.
didn't know what did apply, but like all this shit that you told yourself after
What else
completing
can I
that
find
race.
out about myself is what came next.
Right. Okay. So everything was open at that point. Everything was confusing and open, and you were ready to learn.
Now, the biggest lesson of all comes about 7 months later because I wanted more of that, right? Like, what can I find out about myself? What other adventures can I do? So my boss and I, we started picking more races and I just started the schedule and then little incremental changes began to happen, right? I wake up before work so I can exercise. So I'm alert in the morning when I get to work. I have more time for my dog in the morning. I wanted to feel better, so I started eating better. I started hydrating better. I needed to keep training, so I needed to start stretching and I needed to become mentally tougher. And everything about mental toughness cites meditation. So I decided to pick that up too. And that, when I'm doing my passive stretching routine, 30 minutes at night, focusing on long, deep breathing techniques, long, deep holds,
Hmm.
that was where my mind, body, and spirit came together.
Start
That's
to
where I
connect.
was able to connect all my worlds in just doing my
Mm.
evening stretches and meditations, my spiritual world, my physical world, my mental world, my sobriety, like my training, my life, all of it began to come together. And I just felt like I was becoming a better person.
Mm.
And I could
Mm.
recognize this in other people and the way they
Mhm.
interacted with me. And that made me just start to feel like a whole, like, wow, look at what I'm capable of, right?
Mm. So, Nick, I also want to question that. So, you said I could recognize that I was becoming a better person in other people the way they reacted to me. What was your aha moment there? How did you see that? Because it's hard to see ourselves. So, it's very astute of you to recognize that you were seeing reflections of yourself. But how did you recognize that?
Well, one thing you got to understand, I'm a 20-year private investigator, and watching other people's reactions to situations is like breathing to me. Second of
Hmm.
all,
Hmm.
because I was still hypersensitive about the way other people thought about me, I hadn't quite,
Hmm.
these are things that took until now to really understand. I would still pay certain attention to things, but what I realized is just how it was almost how I saw people were getting more easy around me. They weren't as
Mm.
tense around me. They weren't
Mm.
expecting this short fuse as much as they were. But I wish I could tell you it was just intuition. But honestly, it was one of the senior IT like data architect guys came in my office one day. I don't remember why. We didn't have to interact a lot. And he was literally just asking me. I had probably this picture, the one above it up on the wall. And he was asking me about some Spartan stuff. And he straight up told me, he's like, well, I can see a change in you. I used to think you were such a dick.
Mm.
I was a VP, he was not. It was a
Right.
pretty
Right.
ballsy thing to say, and I really appreciated it. Like, I was like, "Okay." So, it just made me wanna be a better person, right?
Right. Right.
But that's when it hit me.
Mm. Yeah, and then that makes sense. And you having your energy shift so much that he can feel safe to tell you what he really thought is pretty
True.
amazing,
Yeah, that's true. I doubt
right?
he probably would have done that very long
Yeah,
before
before he
then.
definitely wouldn't have, right? Yeah.
Now, when
Oh,
I say
cool.
that's when it hit me, I mean the second car.
Oh, shit.
I was on my way it was literally the day after my 3rd anniversary of sobriety. I was coming home from training with my friends. I pull up to a red light. A few seconds later, bam, car going full speed hits me from behind. Ricochets off my car.
Yikes.
Boom, 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 boom. She flips over 4 times like something out of the movies. I get out of the car, not quite realizing that I had just been hit by someone going 65 and a 45 at a dead stop. She was alive at the time. My Jeep was pretty jacked up. I have several herniated discs and nerve damage from that. That nerve damage was undiagnosed for quite a while.
Mm. Mm.
I went
Yeah.
home that night and my cat of 12 years died.
Oh, jeez.
10 days later, the lady who hit me died. And
Wow.
even though all I was doing was sitting at a red light, I
Yeah, you still feel that.
I felt responsible. And there was some other things going on too. Like all of a sudden, literally the day before, I'm noticing the good of my transformation in other
Right.
people. And
Right.
now all of a sudden, I was not just back to where I started, but worse because I was
Mm.
depressed. I was sad. I was injured. I felt responsible. I didn't have a diagnosis. So I was sitting on the couch. I noticed all the negative changes at work around me. I felt like my position was changing. Like my world got shifted upside down in 1 minute.
Mhm.
And I wanted to quit. I wanted to give up.
Yeah.
But what does that mean? I wasn't suicidal and I just wanted it to stop. You keep going to work. And so you wake up and you take a shower and you walk the dogs and you eat food. And a couple weeks go by. And the next thing I know, I still don't have a diagnosis on my shoulder. And I was like, well, fuck it. I might as well sign up for another race. And so I did. But I'm trying to work out. And it's almost like that scene in Rocky 3 where he's just like running, but he's not. He's not really in it. And that was me. And I didn't have Adrian because I had the conversation with myself. And I was listening to a motivational speaker or one of those compilations on YouTube. And it was someone going back and forth about, you can be a victim or survivor, victim or survivor. And I was thinking to myself, I don't know the fucking difference
Mhm.
because I'm standing here and I go, yay, I'm a survivor. What's the point?
Right.
Where has
Right.
this led me? I'm still getting beat up. Like,
Right.
what's the point of being a survivor? How is this a life? How am I helping anybody else? Is this really what this is? And I decided that, you know what? Win, lose, or draw, that's not what life was going to be like for me. That's not why we exist. We are not here simply to exist. We're here to thrive. And that's what I decided it was going to be. And at that moment, this was the moment. This is the one I recognized in the time because I said out loud at like 4:30 in the morning in my backyard, I will not be defined by my circumstances, but rather my triumph over them. And ever
Mm.
since then, it's like a game to me. I am literally going to pick a fight with all the shit that's wrong with me and stands in my way.
Right.
Like, that's why I race every race with the words "fuck cancer" written across my chest. It's why I'm raising money for the American Cancer Society. It's why I help other alcoholics get sober. It's how I say "fuck you" to diabetes by showing other diabetics that we too can play on the same field in the same competitive level as anybody else. It's how I get moved beyond all my injuries and all the pain. It's when I lose a job, when I get injured, when I get sick, when I have a financial issue, it's how do I get to overcome this now? It's no
Right.
longer make it stop because I am meant for a long, hard climb.
Right. So what's the quote again that you said? I'm no longer defined by my
I will
circumstances.
not be defined
I will not be defined by my
by
circumstances,
my adversity, but rather my triumph over it.
but your triumph over it. Yeah, that's great. That's
Oh,
great.
I guess that is circumstances, but regardless, not I will no longer is. I will not because that is
Right.
the thing that I can decide, and it is a mindset
Yes.
thing. That's
Yes.
not to say that when bad things happen, I don't pout, but I take a day, and it's not a decision. It usually takes me about a day, and I just get pissed. It's not really the pity party anymore, but of course I'm human. I have those moments, but
Sure.
then I move beyond it simply by action, by taking action, by figuring out how do I get out of this, take the first couple steps, and your mindset begins to evolve.
So I want to park on that for a second because you said that the first time and after this you lost your cat and you had this car wreck and everything was shit and you just wanted it to stop. And then you said, but I had to keep going to work. I had to keep taking action. And now you said it again. I had to take action. So if somebody is in that place of just wanting it to stop, like, "Ugh," what's the action? Is it any action or is there a particular action? That seems to be the key for you to move through it. Now you say it only takes you a day to move through it, but what's the action? What is it that keeps you going to take that motion or action that needs to make you feel better?
Everyone has two choices: what is and what can be.
Hmm.
If you don't take action, then quit bitching about what is, because that's your life and that's your decision. That is your life. What can be is the other decision. And I just want to go find out. So the first time, though, it wasn't so much like, I'm going to take action to get out of this. It was, well, if I don't go to work, I'm going to lose my job. So you go to work.
Right.
Right. But what used to take me 3 months now, I can get moving again in a day because I now have the ability and mindset to get to understand that action conquers doubt, action conquers fear, action moves you forward, action moves you up. Every step forward gives you a different perspective. Every step up gives you a greater view. I don't stop being sad when I lose a pet, but I move beyond the sadness because we still have responsibilities and a life to live. I carry a
Right.
lot of those things with me. It's not about not being afraid. It's not about not being sad. It's about doing it anyway. And
Right.
so is any action
So
better
it's
than no
feeling the
action?
feeling. If you lost a pet, you feel the feeling of sadness, but you keep living your life. You don't just sit in under your bed and suck your thumb. You go to
And
work.
I mean, there's a day or two and however long to anybody. I don't decide that for anybody else, right? Like you got to process. I think we have to process and however we do it.
For sure.
I'm fortunate now that my sit here and wallow in it stage has gotten a lot shorter.
Right. Right.
But any action is better than no action in these situations. However, purposeful action is how you make changes.
Hmm.
And that's
Hmm.
why for me it was signing up for a race because even that back in after the car accident, right? And even though it was definitely like just big pity party, I wanted everybody in the world to feel sorry for me, which was even making it worse because nobody would, right? And how frustrating that is. And you just feel more separated. Even in that wallowing stage of like grief, too, I had to pick something to get out of it. So I picked another race. I had to pick a focal point. And that's a lot of what, to bring it back to physical activity in the first place, in sport and endurance racing and stuff like that in particular, it's a vehicle for transformation. Like the people in my circles know that I do these things, but I mean, by many people's standards, they wouldn't even consider me an athlete,
Right.
like, and I'm not comparing myself to any one of those people. But for me, the thing I love about the physical fitness aspect is it's black and white. A mile is a mile.
Yeah.
10 minutes is 10 minutes. A heart rate is a heart rate. Like first place is first place. There are just certain metrics and barometers of things. And because of that, I can work on self improvement. And there's no area of improving physical fitness that will not benefit the rest of my life.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, another thing I love about it too, it seems to be the most, for me in my life, it's almost the most clear cut. If I have a goal, if I pick a race, if I'm willing to do the suffering, there's somebody that knows exactly the steps to take. And if I do those steps, if I put in the hours, if I do the stretching, if I don't give up when I hurt, I will get to that event. I may not do it in exactly the time I want to or whatever else, but it's pretty cut and dried. Like if I have a goal with physical fitness and I hire a coach that knows how to get there and I do what the coach says, I'll get there. Full stop. Right. To me, that's pretty cool. It feels different than other areas of life that are a lot more nebulous.
You just mentioned something very important too. I think it's missed by so many who don't embrace this lifestyle or maybe even kind of want it, but are afraid. You said the starting line. That's the important part. What happens after the starting line is pretty irrelevant to me.
Right.
It has
Thank
very
you for
little
saying that.
impact
Yeah.
on my
Yeah.
life at
Yeah.
all. Nobody else in the world gives two fucks about how I do in a race.
Right.
My wife
Right.
will, only because she's gonna have to deal with my attitude for a day, right? Other than that, it's getting to the starting line. God, I can't believe this. 12 days? Jesus Christ.
Is that
In
where you
12
have your
days.
big one?
I mean, shit, by now it's 10:30 in the morning. I'll be 4 hours. I don't even know where I'll be, but I'll probably be 6 or 7,000 feet with climbing by that time of day already. A good 10 miles. I don't know, like climbing up and down that mountain, doing obstacles. And I'll be honest, man, I'm in that, you'll get this. I'm in this terrible headspace right now where, dude, you work from home. Why aren't you traveling? Why weren't you training 6 hours a day for this? Dude, you're 12 pounds more than you wanted to be for this. Like,
Raising my hand for everybody that's not watching on video.
yeah, and I followed, and then I'm looking at all the things I didn't do, and because I am broken, I'm Humpty Dumpty in a lot of ways.
Sure.
This morning, right, I did a bunch of hamstring curls, no weight, just lie on the ground and like get my
Yeah.
hands, whatever. Like, the race is in 12 days, and it's still a weak part of me anyway. Did some hip flexor stuff, some adductor stuff, like just lying on a mat, right, for a half hour. Walked my dog for a half hour, did some stretches, called it a day. To me, I didn't work out. Like
Right.
that's, I think about
Right.
those days. You got to remember how vitally important working the small things are and the small steps are, especially as we're not young men anymore. And I'm trying to do some crazy shit. Today's workout may not help me win the race, but it's going to help me from making sure I can still walk a week after the race.
Exactly.
And
It's going to keep you from getting injured. So
yeah,
it won't help you win, but it'll help you finish.
and
Right.
that's the critical part. So you mentioned about if you're willing to suffer, right? I watched Rocky 4 the other day and I picked that one on purpose because I don't know. People who haven't watched Rocky 600 or 700 times need to go back and watch it and listen to the words because Sylvester Stallone is a better writer than he is an actor. And I know he didn't write all the lines, but the theme,
Yes.
the
Yes, that's
speeches and the
correct.
theme of Rocky
Yeah.
4 is about you're going to have to go through hell, a nightmare greater than you've ever experienced.
Yeah.
If I can do that, I can do this. I can finish the race. I can complete the race if I'm willing to suffer. And we all have our own definitions of hell. This one is going to be quite literally Dante's Inferno for me.
Right.
But that said, I mean, my wife right now, like I'm so proud of her because she's running the pass and she's starting to pick up minutes. She's doing it by minutes. So she went like 10-minute run to 12 to 15.
Sure.
Went back to 12 for her down week, right? Went back up to 18. It's 106 degrees down here in Florida. So she is experiencing hell when she does that. She's going to do the 13-mile race on that mountain that day. She'll be going through hell too.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. Like we talk about hell and suffering. Like I watched the Unchained, the Tour de France documentary recently. And the thing that I took away from there is your accomplishment, your success is proportional to your willingness to suffer, right? How hard are you willing to push yourself? And for something that's a good cause, that feels like it for you to do. And I know the days that I push myself the hardest physically, I have ahas. Like I remember when I was running the Shanghai Marathon for the second time, living in China, and it was brutal. The air was like almost 500 air quality. I had a mask on running a marathon.
Wow.
Right. And it was 33 degrees and sort of spitting sleet and rain. And it was cold. I mean, just like you couldn't quite get it right. And at 17 miles, my mask clogged up. I couldn't breathe through it. So I threw it out. Now I'm breathing this wonderful air. And I thought, this is hard. I'm crying. I'm like, this is horrible. And then I thought, no, I thought it was hard, but I didn't think it was horrible, which is a big differentiation. I thought this is really hard, but it's not bad. But at the time, if I had a hard day at work or a hard day with my family, I would say that it was bad. But a hard day on the marathon course, I was like, yeah, this is really hard, but I would never say it was bad. And it shifted my whole mindset. Right. So then even after that, when we went back, I was running a really big company at the time. We went back and added to our core values. We do hard things. Yeah, that's right. So I tell somebody, hey, we got to have this done by this date, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, it's really hard, boss. Yep. What do we do? Oh, yeah, that's right. We do hard things. Just go do it. Right. This is what you're talking about, shifting the mindset from victim to overcoming. Right. To how am I going to take it? But that's lived with me. This morning, I was doing hill repeats, 1.5 mile hill repeats on trails, about 12 miles total. And in the middle of this, I feel myself, my heart rate's up and I'm tired and it's not as hot as Florida. It's a beautiful morning, but it's still really humid. So I'm just sweating like crazy. And I feel my shoulders going forward and I start to feel a little pity for myself. Like, oh, I'm pushing so hard. And all I have to do is put my shoulder back and smile. I think, wow, I get to kill this mountain one more time. I get to kill this hill one more time. And it changes the whole experience. So I love that question of like, what needs to be done? What's the training that needs to be done? But the second part, how can I have the most fun doing it instead of having a pity party? What can I make it fun? I'm twirling around, smiling and dancing as I'm running up this mountain because I want to make it fun as well. People probably think I'm crazy. There's a big traffic queue as I was running back to the house and I'm running up this hill fast. It was my last hill repeat, smiling because that's what feels good. Even though I'm pushing myself, it feels a lot better to be smiling about it than feeling sorry for myself.
You probably can't tell from here, but the picture behind me is the 2018 Boston Marathon.
Oh, nice.
That was the nor'easter. It was 18 degrees at the start and sleeting. And I don't know if you can tell from the picture, but I have no gloves. My shirt is thinner than the t-shirt that I have on now.
Right.
Because I hate wearing a bunch of shit and I wasn't prepared. This, of course, that picture is towards the finish. And my trash bag parka, I had gotten rid of around mile 11. That's also where I got rid of my thin select gloves because they were freezing and weighed like boxing gloves. So at first it was like, now I got to remember, I grew up there. Like I knew every inch of that route. Like, and it was just so nostalgic for me. Right. And of course I was just looking to see people that I might have worked with 10 years ago, like anything. Right. Framingham was my old sales territory. I've been at the marathon 10 times, usually drunk at the Red Sox game. Like it was so, you know, I grew up on, I didn't grow up there, but my grandparents and aunts and uncles live on Heartbreak Hill. So like I used to be there all the time. So this was just such a deal for me. Right. And I could have been like, wow, my first marathon. I raised $10,000 to be here. I trained for 16 weeks, like blah, blah, blah. And oh my God, it's raining. And I'm going to get, and I mean, it was the highest dropout rate in the history of the Boston Marathon.
Wow.
And I mean, it was mile 17 or 18. You're in Wellesley and I'm running by this Italian restaurant. And I'm like, hey, I just had dinner there the other night. And that was the darkest moment of the race because then I realized it took us about a half hour to drive back to the hotel from there. And that's when I was like, I'm so fucked. Because I was like, I'm completely frozen, right? Whenever I was running by aid station, I was like, did anybody have gloves, like socks, anything? Like, it was just bad. I remember I'm running by one of the gel stations and I'm like what? I was like, open it. Because I couldn't access my own gels because my hands are frozen solid at that point. Now, I tell you this, but if you look at any one of my pictures, and sometimes you got to look close because it was pretty miserable, but I'm smiling.
Right.
I didn't know where the cameras were. I committed. I told myself, I don't give a fuck. This is the Boston Marathon.
Right, I'm going to enjoy
it. Holy grail. I have wanted this my whole damn life. I didn't decide to run a marathon until like 2014, but I was like, still, this was such a big deal for me that it was the most miserable and rewarding experience just ever.
Yeah, no. So it is, I mean, doing hard things is really what brings us alive, right? That's a chapter in one of the books that I've written is that doing hard things makes us alive, brings us alive. And that's really the case. But it's hard to remember. But I love your point about taking action. We get into our pity parties, when we get into our self-doubt, when we get internal focus, to take some action. Right. I was talking with my wife about that this week. She's like, you should make a list of the options that you can take when you get yourself in that place. I have a bunch of different ones, but I think I'm going to do that actually, put it in my phone. So if I get in that place, I just pick it up and then I can just follow down that list.
What's the first one you give to somebody, top of your head?
So the first one I give to myself is I do a feeling check-in, right? I take an observer position that you get from meditation. I ask myself, what am I feeling? I name it, right? That's the first thing. So I name, I'm feeling depressed. I'm feeling this heavy. Where am I feeling it in my body? So I really get it clear. It's this weight pulling down on my eyes, pulling down on my heart. And then here's the one that when I first started doing it, I thought I was schizophrenic. Who's feeling it? And it's really interesting because then it'll be this voice. It's completely different than my own, right? It's this voice. I'm feeling it like you suck and life is horrible. And why the hell even bother? A completely different voice even coming out of me. And then I have a conversation with that part of me. And like, okay, what do you want? What is your purpose? What are you afraid of? And I have this real conversation with it. I found out after I've been doing this for a year and a half or 2 years, there's actually a whole school of psychology around this called internal family systems by Richard Schwartz. But that's one of the actions that I take the first, because by acknowledging that, by moving through it, by recognizing that I am not that part, like that's one of the voices and feelings going on, but that's not me, because I can have a conversation with it from the seat of self, which I call the connection to God. That helps me to move through it really, really well. So that's usually the first action. And I'll continue that conversation. And I don't push that part of me away. I don't make it wrong. I simply acknowledge it. I see it. I ask what it needs, what its purpose is. And then I try to show often it's a younger part of me, and that feels really scared or insecure, or we're not going to be loved, or I'm going to starve, or something like that. And if it recognizes that I'm already 53 years old, it relaxes a lot. And then it can just have fun and play. Right. So that's the first thing I do. The second one that I recommend, and I do for myself or do to others, is have the conversation with somebody else that you trust and love, that doesn't have an agenda besides it loves you. Right. So that you're not just the internal focused pity party. And the third one is just like you said, just take action. What is it that's on your list that needs to get done? Quit thinking about it and go do it. If it's a run, go do it. If it's paying the bills, go do it. If it's going to work, go do it. Whatever it is, just go do it, taking that action. I remember when I was 18, it was my first professional job as a co-op student in Georgia. And I was feeling really depressed. And I talked to this friend of mine. She was on the podcast recently, Anissa Telwar, big businesswoman now in Atlanta, started her own company. But I was like, I just feel really depressed. And I'm by myself. It's the weekend. I don't need to work that weekend. I was already full on workaholics. I'm like freaking out because I have nothing to do. My addiction wasn't being filled because it was work. And she said, clean your apartment. She'd never been to my apartment, but she knew I'm an 18-year-old boy. She's like, clean your apartment. I'm like, hey, what does that have to do with anything? She goes, shut up, clean your apartment, call me back. Take action. So I clean the apartment, I call her back. She goes, how do you feel? I was like, I feel better. So that's the third thing is, so I check in with myself. That's the first one. Talk with somebody else about it, and then take action. Those are the three main ones that I do.
Interesting, because I've conquered the first one. For me is always a default. I've already had these conversations with myself, and I don't need to have them again because I'm either afraid, angry, self-loathing.
Right. Shame. Yep.
Well, that one's usually like my self-loathing is, okay, it's shame, but I'm usually pretty mean about it. We'll just say that.
There's a really strong critic letting you know about it. Yeah.
Or shame and sadness. So it's somewhere on that spectrum, all right? But the answers are almost always the same for me because if I'm afraid, it means take action.
Yep.
And that's where sometimes I'll break it down to the stupid, because that's honestly, I have fear all day, every day.
Sure.
Unless I get $1 million sitting in the bank, I'm going to be financially afraid. So constantly I'm like,
change when you have $1 million.
Well, at least I'll put
I have a lot more than that, and I still feel financially afraid a lot of the time.
Well, in that case, then you'll understand, right? You could either work on the psychology about it, or you can do something about it, right? So for me, it's what can I do about it? Go make money. What's the step I need to do? What's the most productive thing I can do right now that gets me on that? Because more often than not, the fear is just telling me that maybe I'm not as buttoned up as I think, or maybe I'm not doing the right action sometimes, right? If it's this self-loathing thing, I need to get out of self, which means I need to go find someone to help.
Right.
And that comes in all shapes and forms. Sometimes it might be a message back from somebody who I reached out to or reached out to me. It might be as simple as letting somebody out in the traffic. You really want to blow somebody's mind, let them out.
Right.
Like the things that just get you out of self, that realize the things that you're stressed about aren't that important. Like, okay, my world isn't the most important one. If I'm 2 seconds late to this thing, the world isn't going to end.
It's not going to stop. Yeah.
My time is valuable, and it's even more valuable when I use it to help someone else. So those things get me out of self. And it is, of course, infinitely rewarding and helps kind of hit those redirect moments. But then a lot of it is because the uncertainty part is I just need to understand. Like if I'm feeling a little lost, stuck, or unmotivated, I just need to reset for a minute, not rethink my whole life, just pick back up. Well, okay, this is where I was lost. This is where I am. I don't know what this is, and I'm letting this blank space stop me from moving forward. Google it, AI it, like ask a friend, phone a friend, whatever. But like, what is and I mean this, the stupidest and most specific thing that I can do to take that first action, which usually means Google something, schedule something, or do it right now.
Yeah. In the 8 steps to mastering midlife transition, I wrote about, that's one of the steps. Meet fear with data. Instead of like, okay, what is it really? And for me, I mean, I'm an engineer, right? MBA. Get out an Excel spreadsheet, put the shit down, look at it. Am I really going to starve? Oh, no, I'm not. Right. But to really meet fear with data, whatever it is, take that first action, AI it, Google it, and meet fear with data. Right. And then get started.
I just go back to when I was dealing with that diagnosis, and honestly, it's probably only a couple of weeks, but it felt like months, and I was languishing. I mean, I might as well have been dead. And the thing is, I wasn't afraid to die. I was in pain.
Yeah.
And I was just in pain and I didn't know how else to deal with it. And I probably wasn't even in pain about cancer. I was probably in pain about everything and I didn't know how to deal with it. And so this was like almost a welcomed misery for me.
Mm.
And I just think about it now, how easy it is to go into that spot.
Yes. Yes.
And so if I don't know if I'm feeling certain ways, yeah, I want these little lifelines that just pull me up because all it is. Now, here's the other thing. When I get into these places too, this is again, sometimes it's fear, right? I'll go take my laptop. I'll just stand up and go walk and go in the other room.
Yeah.
I'll go to Panera, go drink a glass of water, walk around the block, 10 minutes on the treadmill, like literally get the blood flowing. When you move a muscle, change a thought. It depends on the activity because sometimes I just need to do the activity, right? I'll set an alarm
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good one.
and a quick alarm. I'm like, how
Yep.
long should this take me? 5 minutes, right? You got 4 minutes and 30 seconds, go. Because
Right.
I'm not building in time for stupid, irrelevant thought. And I'll tell
Right.
you, fear is only good once until you recognize the fear. After that, you're making a decision to live in it. What I mean by that, again, is if I'm fearing for money, it's probably because I don't have enough of it, or I'm not prepared, or I'm not taking the right action. Somewhere inside of me, I know I'm being irresponsible, something like that. Once I recognize it, I can take action towards it and I should stop being afraid.
Right. Yeah. And always, here's the thing is the fear is always tougher than the action itself, even the worst case action, right? I've written about this before and I think about it a lot. Like if I'm standing at the top of a ski hill that's over my head, the fear inside of my head is always worst case. Say then I go down it and I wreck spectacularly, right? So the fear, though, in my mind, when I play it, it's always tougher than the actual, even if it's the worst case. And as soon as I get moving, the fear is gone. Then I have to pay attention to what's going on around me instead of thinking about it.
That's kind of my when it comes to, again, doing the suffering, right? A lot of not a lot of my training, because most of my training is meant to be happy, like I want to train. But
Right.
there are certain workouts that are designed to be absolute miserable sufferfest, like 4 or 5 hour workouts, sandbags, hot sun. The idea, even the last couple of miles just might be like 15-minute jogs because of
Sure.
whatever. But those miles are the ones where, especially because I don't even recognize the physical benefit I'm getting from it, it's so easy to tell yourself to quit. But the only reason I'm doing that workout with that extra time, that last 20 minutes, is here.
Yeah.
It's to purposefully suffer, intentional, controlled suffering, because that's how I train for the mountain. Because if I get into that place where this sucks worse than anything I can imagine right now, then I have less to fear of the mountain. Or when I do think about it, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh man, when it's like mile 19 and I'm like, oh, whatever, I'm like, oh, I've been there.
Yeah. That's
Whatever,
right.
get through it, get to mile 20.
And then how does that inform, Nick, the rest of your life? So we've talked a lot about adventure racing and training, and I love that stuff. I mean, I'm very much into it. How does it inform the rest of your life?
The exact same way. And I mean that exact same scenario where it has been now almost 11 months since I left my position in the corporate world. All right.
Right?
Which means I haven't had a paycheck in 11 months. I haven't had knowing where the next money is coming from in quite a long time. I don't know 5 people in the world who can live that way. All right. And part of the reason I'm able to is the same is breaking down every aspect that we can. Number one, I know what I'm willing to suffer and endure.
Right.
I know how far backwards I'm willing to go because actually, number one, I know what I'm working for. I know what the finish looks like. I know
Mm,
what that finish line
mm,
is supposed to be for me. I'm
mm.
not talking about a race right now. I'm talking about success in life and business, right?
Exactly.
Which
Yeah.
is a moving target. So I'm only talking about the next threshold, which is over here. I'm here, but it doesn't go from here to here. It goes here, back, left, right,
Yeah.
up, down.
Yep.
It's ultimately going to have some long, hard climbs. So that's number two, is accepting that this is going to be a long, hard climb. I've been able to get through that. 3 is the thing. What am I willing to suffer and endure for? 4, controlled suffering, because I know the worst it can get.
Right.
It's not going to get, I'm not going to be homeless,
Right.
right? I'm
Right.
not going to be scavenging out of trash bins. Like, that's not going to get that way. So
Right.
I'm afraid of ego. I'm afraid of inconvenience.
Right.
Well,
Right.
guess what? I'm climbing a mountain for 14 hours. That's at least 14 days of headaches I can sustain in real life. So,
Right.
but then a lot of it just has to do with the experience of knowing that you've gone through hard things before. You'll get through hard things again. As a matter of fact,
Dude, that I want to pause on that because I think that is the number one thing of everything we've talked about. If you can practice doing the hard things, then you talked about resilience earlier. This is really resilience. Then you know whatever happens, you can get through it. You can, whatever the hard thing that comes up, you can handle it. You can survive it and you can thrive it, even if it's very difficult, right? And to me, that's much more valuable than having $1 million in the bank. It's much more valuable than even doing a race. But it's what you learn from that. Is like, I know when tough things come up, I can center myself and I can find a way to see it as a challenge and overcome it, no matter, here's the key, no matter what it is. even if you're under, you said we're not going to be homeless, right? I think it was Seneca that said every so often you should go outside and live under a bridge, have coarse clothing, no cleaning, and very rough or no food. Asking yourself the whole time, is this what I fear so much? Right? That's the intentional suffering. Oh, I'm so freaked out about this, but I can even handle this.
You know what's funny? When I'm doing whatever, one of the most miserable Spartan races I can think of, right? I'm covered in mud and cow shit, sweat, blood,
Yeah.
bugs, dead grossness. Okay. Just grossness, just gross. We'll just say gross. And I'm injured because I'm always injured.
Right.
I'm in
Right.
pain. My blood sugars are squirrely. I have a headache. I love myself. I
Mm,
love that guy because you know what I'm doing during all that shit? I'm not bitching about any of it. And I'm just
mm,
taking the next step. And I feel like a
mm,
badass because I
mm,
transcend all the other stuff.
mm,
And I love that person. The person who's
mm.
clinging to his comfy couch, I'm not as big of a fan of. I don't like it
Right.
when I sit around and indulge. No, don't get me wrong. My wife and I can binge watch something like crazy. Okay.
Sure.
I'm not a
Sure.
24/7 go hard guy. Like, but if I'm doing that in place of something I ought to be doing or want to be doing, that's when I feel bad about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's something I like to say all the time, which is what you touched on after what I said is I have to remind myself constantly, you will survive this because up until this point, there is no evidence to the contrary.
Right. Right.
Anytime you think you can't get through it, scoreboard.
Right.
You've gotten through all the
Right.
other ones. Go
Right.
get
Meet
through all
fear,
the other
meet
ones
fear with
too.
data, right? The actual results. Yeah, no, that's really great. I'm trying to think back, like what I want to pull out here, Nick, is if you hadn't had that transition, and I think it was like if I think about the one that really resonates with me is when you decided that you were no longer a victim, that you actually had some agency in your life. If you hadn't made that decision at that point, if you hadn't made that transition, where do you think your life would be today?
I would be significantly financially better off.
So that's one of the things you're willing to suffer or willing to
Yeah, I don't think I would
sacrifice, right?
because the way that I would make that money is by leveraging all of the former strengths that were also used against me as weaknesses. And what I mean by this is I would not have been a very good person. I would
Mm,
not have been a very good boss. I would not have been an empathetic leader. I doubt I would even be a good husband. Probably, I wouldn't have been able to open my eyes to all the other areas of my life through development, which means I would lean into my resentment. I would lean into my selfishness. I would use these things as weapons and tools. And not, oh, and by the way, the
mm.
bad guy never knows he's the bad guy. So I wouldn't think that I was doing anything wrong,
Right, right,
especially
right,
because, like always, I would have my followers in my circle and whoever to validate whatever the gripes are, who also thought the people who didn't like me were assholes. And
right.
I would live in this chamber where, I mean, you can't always predict the success in business, but I feel pretty confident that I would have had a long, successful career in sales that I would have hated every single second of it.
Mm,
Oh, and by the way, just because I'm not that financial place right now, I'm going to get there. As a matter of fact, let me rephrase because that guy would have been limited and capped working as a W 2 for someone else
yep,
forever,
absolutely.
which meant he would have been capped to the highs and lows and some of the other things. Whereas there are zero limitations in my life at all in any area whatsoever.
Right.
I'm a little too
So,
old to get into politics and run for president, so we'll write that one off.
yeah, me too. But so, long story short, if you hadn't made that transition, you'd still be around. You'd still be functioning in the ways of the eyes of the world that looks acceptable, but you would not at all like the person that you are.
Yeah. Up until that moment in 2017, it was me against the world. But me against the world is the rally cry of the victim mindset.
Right.
You
Right. Yeah.
can't be me against the world if you aren't a
Yeah.
victim of the world. And if you're a victim of the world, you are always going to be limited by those beliefs, and that's going to impact limiting thoughts, limit actions, limiting actions, limit results, limiting results, limit your life, period. And
Yeah.
it's a vicious cycle.
Absolutely. It's a death spiral. Next question. What transition have you been resisting making for a long time, Nick?
Ooh, I like that one. You know, it's funny because I mentioned the 2018 Boston Marathon, and what I remember mostly about that was when I adopted the 4:07 a.m. wake up call and how consistent I was, and how it was probably the single most impactful thing I did. And I even like to talk about
Mm,
how back then I used to run 4 o'clock in the morning in December. And my neighborhood was one of those neighborhoods you really did up Christmas. Like
mm.
people would travel to come drive through our
Yeah.
neighborhood.
Yeah.
The lights were still on at 4 in the morning. And so I'm running through this like winter wonderland, experiencing life from a different perspective, right? I struggle to get out of bed now like I used to.
Mm,
And
mm,
I actually have this conversation with myself because I'm doing the dumb thing. I'm looking at my workout. I'm looking at what time I need to do certain things, and I'm negotiating with myself.
mm,
If I was firing on all cylinders with that simple thing, why aren't I just doing it now? And
mm,
so I think that is the next thing that holds me back from propelling forward in business
mm.
and in life is I'm missing that part because the times where I self-loathe now or when I don't get as much accomplished, or I don't hit that level of achievement in the mornings like I feel that I should. That's, again, it's not an all the time thing, right? Like on
Right.
Sunday, I want to just sleep in. So
Sure.
I sleep in. Today, I cost myself a half hour. So I'm either
Right.
going to cost myself a half hour of work, which I can't afford, a half hour of exercise, which is the one that's going to get sacrificed.
Right.
And so what's going to replace that time is the self-loathing talking in the back of my head throughout the day.
Right.
And that's going to cause stress, whatever, all these things ripple effect from what? Not putting my feet on the floor when the alarm went off,
Right.
which is actually about my post on LinkedIn today too.
Oh, cool. So what would you like to do about that?
When I come back from Killington, because that's 12 days away, and right now I need to make sure I'm getting my rest.
Absolutely.
I'm going to reevaluate my schedule going for the next quarter or so forth, and I'm going to pick a wake up time that is independent of what I have to do that day. And I'm going to do that.
So you're going to practice that. Yeah.
When people ask me about what started the life in transition, it was the most important thing I did besides saying yes to the race was when I set my alarm for 5 o'clock in the morning to wake up before work. That was the most impactful change. Honestly, other than getting sober, that was the most impactful change I could have made in my life.
Taking control of the day at the beginning of the day.
One small step that sets every other thing in motion.
I heard somebody say, I don't know if it was Tim Ferriss or Rich Roll, but they're talking about that people that are intentional in life. I say successful, but I don't mean monetarily, right? But living an intentional life that they're really proud of. They may have different morning practices, but they all have morning practices. They all start their day with intention, all of them, right? Whatever that looks like. So I think that's a really big one. If you could give, and we've talked around this a lot, but if you could pick one tool for our listeners, Nick, right, that you would say, if they're in that space, open it up a little bit more than that. I would say if they're in that space of that darkness or depression, how to get themselves out of it. But it could be anything. If they want to accomplish something, if they want to start taking the first step toward physical vitality, you and I sort of take that. I won't say we take it for granted. We have mastered it to a certain point. To a lot of people, that seems really impossible to do the stuff, the physical type of stuff that we do. We put in the energy for that. But if there's one tool that would help move people in the way that they want to move right now, that anybody can do and they can start right now, what would that tool be?
Oh man, to make this broad, I'm going to have to just say it's hard for me to answer this question for people who don't want to do something and who aren't looking to get started.
Okay. Well, they won't be listening to this podcast if they're
all right. Then I don't need to worry about them because honestly, I don't know how to talk to people like that. So for everyone else to get started is break it down to the wildly specific and stupidly simple action step. Do something to get started. If you're sitting down right now, stand up. If you're standing up, sit down. If you want to go for a run and what are you listening to this for? You can do it in your headphones. Go get your shoes. If you have something to write, where's your pen? If you have a phone call to make while you're listening to this podcast right now, make the call. There are so many things standing in our way. And by the way, when we don't do them, what happens in between?
Right. So whatever that action is that's going in your head that I would like to do this, but you don't. Stop right now and take that action.
Whatever
Make that call, put on your running shoes, whatever it is. Go do that action and then see where it takes you.
100%.
Okay.
Action inspires action and progress inspires progress.
Yeah. I love that quote. The motion creates the emotion. Right. So, okay. Wonderful, Nick. No, I really appreciate it. I think I couldn't agree more. Take some step of action and move forward. Last question. Where can listeners find out more about your amazing life and interesting story? Where can they find out about you, Nick?
You find me anywhere on social media at Stride Motivation, or you can contact me directly on my website, stridemotivation.com.
Awesome. Nick, thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you for the inspiration and the mindset of whatever comes your way now is a challenge and how to overcome it instead of a pity party. That's really wonderful. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I can't wait to hear what action you are taking. Connect with me on LinkedIn or our website, lifeintransition.online, and let me know. Let a friend know too. It could be a huge encouragement to them and keep you on the track. Thank you so much for joining me today. Make sure you subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, and it would mean a lot to me if you left a review and shared this episode with a friend. If you want to learn more about me and what I do when I'm not podcasting, please visit me at artblanchford.com. Thank you for listening. Together, let's make the most of life in transition.